In my last video, I left several open questions about crankcase vacuum and crankcase pressure. Let's knock those out. How's it going, everybody? If you didn't see my last video, I will have a link to it later on in this video and also down in the video description. And in that video, I tried to measure crankcase pressure and vacuum. I posed a question about whether or not I needed the check valve in the crankcase vent. And I also pondered whether or not I would keep the external breather mod along with the crankcase vent. So let's try to bring clarity to all those questions today. This is a relatively short video, but I'm going to cover a lot of material and I recommend that you watch the whole thing. But if you really want to skip ahead to a certain section, you can use the timestamp links in the video description. By the way, if you're new here, my name is 𝗖𝗢𝗡𝗧𝗘𝗡𝗡𝗧𝗦 and I'm a motorcycle enthusiast just like you. And here on this channel, I tackle projects of all sizes related to the bikes I ride, and I give you as much information as I can about those different projects, and I try to share my learnings along the way. So be sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and enable all notifications so you'll be alerted whenever I post new videos. Before we go any further, let me give a huge shout out and thank you to Kevin Baxter of Baxter's Garage and Pro Twin Performance. He was very patient and generous in giving me input on these topics about crankcase pressure and sumping, and he really helped to de-shroud all these mysteries. So if you haven't yet checked out his channel, be sure to do that. He does really great work and he provides a wealth of information on his channel, and I'll provide a link to his channel down in the video description. Kevin, thank you very much. I really appreciate you. Let me throw out a quick disclaimer here. There's a lot to this topic and there are a lot of different opinions out there about these things, and today I'm just going to touch on a few of these points and share with you my thoughts based on what I've learned and the research that I've done along the way. You can definitely dive deeper on these, but today I'm just going to touch on a few of these things to help answer some of the unanswered questions that I left in my last video. First of all, I'm really not concerned that I couldn't measure the crankcase vacuum with that very basic test that I did. It was a fun experiment to do, but again, I'm not concerned that I wasn't able to do that. And I think it's more important to focus on the other questions that were unanswered in that video. It's also clear that excess crankcase pressure causes a whole host of problems. For example, gasket leaks, valve stem seal leaks, inefficient piston ring sealing, oil transfer from engine to primary, oil transfer from primary to transmission, and of course, sumping. Although there's a lot of buzz about these M8 motors and the issue of sumping, it is certainly not a new problem, and it definitely did not start with the Milwaukee 8 motor. So what is sumping? It's the accumulation of an excessive amount of oil in the sump of the motor. That may not sound very bad, but sumping causes a lot of problems in a motor. And how is it that excess crankcase pressure is related to sumping? Well, here are a couple of examples. It can keep the oil in the sump aerated, and that makes it harder for your pump to pull that oil out of the case. Aerated oil works against an oil pump, whether it's a really good oil pump or a not so great oil pump. Aerated oil works against its ability to pull that oil out of the sump. It also works against piston ring seal, where a vacuum helps those rings to seal. Excess pressure works against their ability to seal effectively in the cylinders. That can lead to over-oiling. That can lead to additional blow-by, and then it starts to compound and things start to get worse. One great way to alleviate excess crankcase pressure is to put the crankcase under vacuum. I hear you. I debated this in the last video and in the one before that, wondering whether or not it was really necessary or beneficial. Well, it is definitely beneficial. And to be clear, when I added the external breather mod to my engine, I did indeed remove that vacuum source that would have allowed that vacuum to be present in the crankcase. And the check valve in the crankcase vent is definitely beneficial as well, because that allows that excess pressure to be blown out, but it still allows for a vacuum if one is ever present in the crankcase. So where does that leave me with the mods that I've done to my bike? And now remember, I still have the crankcase vent on the engine, and I have a check valve in that crankcase vent. Well, in the last video, I reversed the intake breather mod that I'd previously done, and I wanted to get in a few rides and check those breather bolts and see what kind of oil deposits I was seeing on the bolts after putting some miles in. So after a few weeks of riding, I pulled those intake bolts out, gave them a quick check, and I was pleasantly surprised to see that there was virtually no oil on them, and I couldn't detect any oil at all in the intake itself. So that's a really good sign that this combination for me of the crankcase vent with the OEM intake/head breather system is working well to alleviate the excess crankcase pressure that I have that's caused by normal blow-by. Let me also point out that I've never experienced any of the typical symptoms that would indicate that I have a sumping problem on my bike. Things like drastic changes in fuel economy, excessive engine temperatures, power loss, or fluctuating oil levels. And the bike is running extremely well. So that's also a plus. At this point, I plan to leave things the way they are, but I do want to do some longer rides and check those intake bolts after those longer rides to see if that makes any difference with the amount of oil that ends up going into the intake. If I see anything different, I'll reassess things and then determine what needs to be done at that point. So what about running just the external breather mod by itself? Well, that solution works really well for a lot of people, and it obviously completely eliminates oil from your intake, but it does remove the crankcase vacuum source. I ran my bike that way for a while with just the external breather mod. The bike ran great, and in my case, because I don't have a sumping problem, it did a great job of alleviating that excess crankcase pressure that's caused by normal blow-by. But again, it did remove the crankcase vacuum source. Another option to consider is one that viewer 𝗧𝗕𝗟𝗘 mentioned, and that's to use the crankcase vent with a check valve along with the external breather mod and use a catch can that has an extra outlet on it so that you can add manifold vacuum to that catch can. That really is a nice combination of both solutions. You've got the crankcase vent with a check valve that allows for vacuum. You've got that going to the catch can. You've got your head breather bolts venting to the catch can. And then you've got a source of vacuum applied to that catch can to allow for crankcase vacuum in the crankcase. Sort of gives you the best of both worlds. I'm thinking I'm even going to try that one myself. While we're talking about this, how much oil is too much oil in the intake coming through the breather system? Well, that's really subjective and it's hard to give a definitive answer on that, but I would just throw out to you that consider the overall condition of your bike and anything that you've got going on in terms of other mechanical issues or the age of the bike. And if you're seeing an excessive amount of oil in the intake or in the breather, you probably want to do a good compression check and leak down test on the bike as a starting point to see if there may be something else going on there that you need to look into further. Have you had problems with excess crankcase pressure or sumping on your bike? Drop in a comment and let me know the details. Also, let me know if you've tried any of these crankcase or breather mods on your bike and what the results have been, or are you considering a different solution to crankcase venting or breather venting based on what you've learned along the way? Drop in a comment on that and share those details with me as well. I'd really appreciate that, and I'm sure the community appreciates all this input as well. Also, let me know if I left out any points that you wanted to see covered, and I can cover those in future videos as well. And if you want to check out my video where I tried to measure crankcase vacuum and pressure, you can use this link. Or if you want to see the video that I released before that, where I covered all the details on how to implement the crankcase ventilation solution, you can use this link. If you found this video informational or useful, please do hit the thumbs up button and share it with your friends. That really helps the channel out a lot, and I certainly do appreciate it. And if you're new here, please do consider subscribing, hitting that notification bell, and enabling all notifications so you'll be alerted whenever I post new videos. Thanks so much for watching. Enjoy the ride. I'll see you next time.